Well, I want to say what I'm delighted to see each of you here tonight. And this event tonight is the result of Linda, who I owe a great debt of gratitude to. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, I gave a similar kind of presentation. And she was gracious enough to allow that event to morph into this one. So I really thank you, Linda, for being the conduit for allowing me to be with each of you here tonight. So I'm going to do sort of 2 talks rolled into one. I'd like to share with you some of my experiences with autism, kind of lay the groundwork to help you better understand some of the kinds of struggles and challenges that not only I faced, but our family did. And also, in so doing, describe briefly in the allotted amount of time some of the social rules that you can find in the Unwritten Rules of Social Relationships book, with which I co-authored with Dr. Temple Grandin. So it all kind of ties together, but I was diagnosed with autism at a time when it was still largely thought of as a mental illness in professional parlance. A lot of the professional people who we dealt with had little to no idea what autism was, because even in the 1960s, a lot of people on the spectrum today, who would be considered on the spectrum today, were still institutionalized because they thought that they were mentally deficient. And when I was diagnosed at age 5, the doctor who gave us the official diagnosis was of the same mindset. They thought that I would need to be institutionalized by the time I reached puberty, and that it would have been preferable for me to have been born retarded, because there were more services and help for people who have mental retardation than there were for people who had autism. And what led to the diagnosis was 5 years worth of behaviors and aberrations that fell directly on to the autism spectrum. You think about classic autism, we usually think of things such as a person who's devoid of eye contact, a person who has a strange fixation with objects, a person who doesn't cry or doesn't reach certain developmental milestones by certain ages. Things like preferring spending more time with objects than with interacting with people. Someone who has a whole host of sensory problems. So all of those, the whole constellation of symptoms fit me to varying degrees. I had a lot of sensory problems. I had a hard time filtering out sounds and being able to focus on a primary sound or something that I should focus on. I didn't like to be touched or held. I can remember many times when my mother would wash my hair, and she would very gently, massage my scalp. And I interpreted that as pain. I didn't like it. And I would yell and scream and carry on when she would try to wash my hair in the course of giving me a bath. Yet, on the other hand, I remember a time when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, when our next door neighbor was burning leaves in his backyard. He had like a fire pit, and it was fall, and he raked the leaves into this pit and started a fire to burn them. And I stepped in the middle of the fire and didn't seem to react. And he came out and grabbed me, got me out of the out of danger. But the thing about that I still vividly remember to this day is my lack of reaction. I had the flames burning around my legs, and I didn't react to it. Another time when I was about 3 years old, we had this safety gate over, it separated the upstairs from the basement steps, and somehow I flung myself over the gate and landed on the floor below, and thank God I didn't land on my head. Instead, I landed on my arm and suffered little more than a broken arm. And my father was in the basement at the time and came over to see what the heck had happened. And the thing that's probably most startling to him was, again, my lack of reaction to it. I didn't cry. I didn't have any indication that I was in any kind of pain. And I almost killed myself by throwing myself down the cellar steps and onto the floor beneath. So it was just sort of that very odd sensory dichotomy that was very backwards in terms of how I managed pain, how I interpreted pain, or the lack thereof. Really, I hold a whole slew of symptoms of autism. I tended to be very repetitious with things. I would do the same kinds of activities over and over, even after being told or asked to stop. And really, all of the things that I did as a child with autism were efforts to try to make sense of the world as I interpreted it. It was very easy for me to become overstimulated. So I would do very repetitious things, basically as a means by which to try to bring some semblance of order to what I saw as complete chaos. I didn't know how to really interpret what was going on around me. It was I had this tunnel vision because I wanted to try to make sense of an environment that didn't make sense otherwise. So I tended to do things in very compartmentalized ways. I would watch the washing machine during the spin cycle from start to finish. I would flush things down the commode and watch the spinning action. I remember we had these big bookshelves in our upstairs bedroom. We had one of those second floor houses in which it was like one big room divided by a bathroom in between. One half of the room was mine, the other half was my sister's. And in the middle of the room was these big high bookshelves that overlooked the steps leading down to the first floor. And I would spend sometimes hours at a time just throwing things down through the slats in the, above the bookshelves and watching them land on the steps. And then I would run down very quickly and retrieve them, go back up and do the same thing over and over again. And I got very upset many times when my parents would try to intervene or redirect me, because I saw that as an interruption of what I felt extremely driven to do. I was doing those things to try to create some kind of order out of chaos. And whenever, my parents would interrupt the process, it would get me very upset and angry sometimes, because they were interrupting my efforts to try to create some kind of sense out of what seemed senseless to me. And all of these behaviors that I was describing, and many more, were all threads that led to that same conclusion. I had various fixations with things. I used to have a fixation with chains that hung from doors or from other places. And I can remember, I think I was a little bit older. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And my parents and I were at a grocery store. And when we were in the checkout line, I saw this older woman on the other side who was wearing those like bifocal glasses, with a chain that hung from her neck, and the glasses were on her chest area. And without warning, I darted over to her and grabbed the chain that was hanging from around her neck. And naturally, she was quite startled and didn't know what the heck was going on? I mean, who is this? Why would this kid, a total stranger, want to attack me? Is what she was thinking. And I was looking at it from the point of view of she had one of those chains around her neck, and I had a fixation with it, and I wanted to grab it. And doing all of these kinds of things, I didn't really understand the relationship between actions and consequences. Sometimes my parents would redirect me, or sometimes if they were reached, their point where they felt it was necessary, they would punish me for doing certain things. And all that did was just validate that I was kind of a bad kid, because I didn't quite understand the natural relationship between actions and consequences. I just saw what I was doing in a vacuum. I had sort of blinders on, sort of this tunnel vision approach at the way I looked at the world, and I didn't understand the natural progression between action and consequence. Some of the things that I did in following up on my fixations were downright dangerous. Around the same time, I developed a fixation with car speedometers. And in those days, you'd have the panel telling you how fast the car would go, and then a needle indicating how fast you were actually traveling. And I would have a fixation with that. And once in a while, I ran out into our street when a car would come down, and I would try to look into the speedometer even when the car was moving. So probably one of the reasons I'm still here with you among the living is that we didn't live on a busy street. It was a very, like a side street, so we didn't get a lot of traffic. Had I been on a busy street, it might have been a very different and rather tragic story. But my parents would try to redirect me, and I still, even something that dramatic, didn't see it as being anything wrong. It was something I felt driven to do. And really, for me, having autism, and many of the things that I did in and of themselves aren't atypical or abnormal in any way. But I think what separates me, having been diagnosed with autism, from other children who do maybe the same or similar kinds of things, is the frequency with which I felt driven to do those things, and the duration of how long I did those things. As I mentioned, some of the activities I would be engaged in for hours if left alone. And of course, my parents had to redirect me, but all of it was a way of trying to thread a sense of order into a pot that contained complete chaos, and trying to fill it with something that made sense. And living like that as a child was comforting as long as I was pretty much left to do what I thought I needed to do. But going through childhood with those blinders on, with that sort of tunnel vision approach to seeing the world, came at a great cost, because I was missing out on a lot of things. I was missing out on the big picture, everything else going on beyond my comfortable sphere. And one of the big things that I was missing out on was learning how to develop social skills, learning how to interact with peers, learning how to ingratiate myself with other children and form friendships that most children learn during their formative years. All of that I missed out on because I was so focused on doing all these other activities that I mentioned a few minutes ago, and certainly a whole plethora of others. And so by the time I became older, when I say older, I mean like school age, middle school, high school, even well into adulthood, I did not have a solid foundation upon which social skills are built. I didn't have that solid foundation. I always compare it to building a house. It's like you can have the blueprints, you can have the best laid plans for building a really sound house, but it's not going to be very solid and work very well if you have a faulty or non-existent foundation upon which to build it. And that's really describes my lack of social skills. So by the time I went to school, and my mother was very afraid, had a lot of anxiety about sending me to a typical school because she saw how I interacted with other people at home and all the meltdowns and things I would have if things didn't go my way. She couldn't, for the life of her, imagine how I'd be able to function in a regular school environment. But I did function. I did go through a regular school system. I had very few interventions. The only help that I can remember having was, I think I was in second grade, and I had occasional speech therapy because I had a lisp, but I didn't have any services or any interventions that were directly related to autism. But I did function reasonably well in school because, as most of you probably are aware, many people on the autism spectrum tend to function better in more regimented, more structured environments. And certainly a school setting was very compartmentalized. You did certain things at certain times. You had, math class at a certain time, you had lunch at a certain time, recess, and so on and so forth. And that type of environment that I did not have at home was very helpful to me, at least in allowing me to function reasonably well. And throughout my school years, I got pretty decent grades, B's and C's, nothing really spectacular. But where I struggled was in the social arena. I can remember as late as my freshman year in high school, I'd gone through school, many years of school with the same people. And by the time I got to high school, there were even a greater number of students that came from the other middle schools. And so we had a high school of about 1,800 people, and I had no idea how to really interact with them. The only conversations I really can remember having with my peers was reciting lines from certain TV shows that I was fixated on, like Gilligan's Island or Hogan's Heroes. I don't know if you remember any of those shows from the 1960s and 70s, but I had a fixation with those, and I would memorize certain laugh lines and then recite them at school, and hoping to get the same kind of reaction, but I didn't, because I was taking the lines out of context. And I didn't realize that to be funny or to have a sense of humor, it has to connect to other things. If you just take something from one setting and verbatim say it in another, it's not going to be funny to people because they don't have the context. Well, all those kinds of things were too abstract for me to really conceptualize, because I thought in very literal, rigid kinds of ways. And I didn't have the ability to really use abstract thinking and reasoning to understand these kinds of dynamics. So ultimately, I certainly didn't have the ability to talk to other people, to start conversations, and to keep the flow of the conversation going. Getting back to my 9th grade year, I remember many times spending the half-hour lunch period in the middle of the day, not in the cafeteria sitting at the table with some of the other students, but outside on one of those wooden benches studying my mother's astronomy book. She took an astronomy class in college, and she still had the textbook. And I was interested in astronomy at this time. I was in 9th and 10th grade. And I would spend the lunch period sitting there by myself, looking at all the star charts and learning about all the technical terms about the planets and the solar system and that sort of thing, while all of my other peers were in the cafeteria socializing and having their lunch with one another. And I would sit out there by myself because I was too frightened to go inside the cafeteria and sit down with them. I mean, they might as well have been in the middle of Russia for all I knew, as far as I was able to get along with them. And I would go the rest of the school day hungry, but I didn't like the feeling of having no food in my stomach for the remainder of the school periods. But I found that to be preferable to taking the risk of being rejected by my peers, many of whom already thought I was very strange because they weren't used to having a child with autism who didn't smile or didn't make eye contact with them. They weren't used to having someone like that in their midst. So I was just as much a mystery to them as they were to me. And so when I look back and reflect upon that time when I went through my interest in autism, and I would sit there and diligently read my mother's textbook, there's really a symbolic component to that also. Yes, I was very interested in the constellations and the planets and solar eclipses and all those kinds of things, but that was also symbolic of the fact that I felt so isolated and so alone in the world and had such low self-esteem that I wished that I was far away, in faraway places, anywhere but at Boardman High School with kids I felt who didn't like me and didn't want any part of me. So looking at an astronomy book was like an escape to me. I could imagine myself and fantasize being millions, if not billions, of miles away from my present situation. And really nothing much changed. I was a very angry adolescent. I had a lot of pent-up anger. I had a lot of depression, even though I wasn't diagnosed as such. And I also had many suicidal ideations because one of the side components of having autism and going through the kinds of experiences I did was having very, very low self-esteem. And it was so low, in fact, that my mother used to get on me about the way I would dress in the morning for school. You know, you'd have to look in the mirror and make sure you look presentable before you leave for the day. And I didn't want to look in the mirror because I didn't quite frankly, like the person looking back at me. So I would just throw on a shirt and button it at will and whatever, hope for the best. And a lot of times I'd go to school looking kind of disheveled or my hair not quite looking the way it should. And, you know, maybe the shirt where the buttons didn't line up, those kinds of things. And that would only further reinforce in the other kids' minds that I was this sort of weird, sort of oddball kid. And so that kind of further fed into my lack of self-esteem and poor self-image and those kinds of things. So it was almost like a sort of like a domino effect. And very little changed until we moved to California. Actually, I lived very close to where you live, Linda. I lived in San Fernando. I went to Silmar High School. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I finished my high school years there because my parents had become more immersed in the music business, and music business was much more viable in the LA area, certainly, than it was in Youngstown, Ohio. So my parents were working with a singer who gained quite a bit of fame at the time named Maureen McGovern, and she was living in the San Fernando Valley. And so we moved out there, and we also moved because my parents felt that staying in Ohio would mean a very bleak future for me. They didn't see me getting any better or any happier. They just were worried that I was going to grow up and just not be able to get a job and just be a pretty miserable shell of myself. And so they felt that by moving to California, that would give me a chance to chart a new course in life. And ultimately it did work, because being in the music business presented a whole smorgasbord of social opportunities. So my parents worked with a lot of the people who they became friends with, and so we had people to the house. They were a lot, and they worked in a recording studio, and oftentimes I would go there, and so it really presented a whole new world of social opportunities for me to grow. But it certainly was not an easy thing, because I didn't have any sense of boundaries. I didn't understand the whole dynamics of relationships, professional ones versus personal, what was appropriate, what wasn't. All of those things were completely foreign to me, because I missed out on all of that during my formative years, and somebody had to teach it to me in a painstaking way. And really, it was kind of a pivotal moment, was when I was in my senior year in high school. I was taking a class called Coping with Adolescence, and it was taught by a wonderful teacher named Eleanor Brawlver, who was an older teacher but had written several books on about teenagers and their challenges and their lives, and was an expert in that area. And this class she taught was sort of part psychology class, part support group, and part health class. If you could imagine the three of those things rolled into one, well, that was the class. And one day she brought up autism, and I don't know what prompted it or anything. I don't remember what the catalyst was for her to bring the subject up, but she described it, and it was like she was describing me. It was almost like she had secretly lived in our house for all these years and was observing me and my interactions with other people. And she described autism, and the way she did it fit me to a T. And around the same time, there was a movie, a made-for-TV movie called Sunrise, S-O-N Rise. And it was a depiction of a 5 or 6 year old child named Ryan Kaufman, who was from the Boston area. And the movie was about how his mother interacted with him. He was on the autism spectrum, and he was quite different from me. He would spin plates around, and he would have his back to you. If you were trying to interact with him, he'd be facing the wall, kind of in his own world. And his mother, as I recall, tried to get into his world with him and spin the plates and interact with him, in the hopes that by doing so over and over, it would eventually draw him out. And he'd be able to connect to her, and by extension to the bigger world around him. And whatever she did ultimately worked. From what I understand, he's a pretty successful person today. I don't know really what he does or a whole lot about his life, but what she did over time did work. And he was a very successful adult. And so my mother and I watched the movie one night, and then we had a rather lengthy discussion into the wee hours of the morning about it. And I really fully realized that it was autism that was causing me to have all these difficulties and challenges in my life up to that point. And because before, I just felt whenever my mother or father would reprimand me, it was just reinforcing in my mind that I was a bad kid. I didn't understand the concept of that they would love me, but not love what I do. We were always trying to separate the behavior from the person. They would say that I hate certain things that you do, but we love you. And that was too abstract a concept for me to really absorb. And this movie, by watching it, made really connected a lot of dots in my mind. It made me realize that I was born with something that was causing this. My brain was wired differently. than most people's. And so as a result, it was causing a lot of these kinds of things. And that's not to say or suggest that my parents kept it from me. It wasn't like I was closeted or that they were ashamed to tell anybody that I had autism. It's just that they're very open about it, but it's just for whatever reason, I wasn't ready to really understand and grasp what it was. In fact, my father taught at the same high school in Ohio here that I went to as a 9th and 10th grader. And this was the mid 1970s. So the school tried to make the best accommodations for me that they could. And I think it was largely because of my father having taught there that they were allowing me to go to school there, because they really wanted to make certain accommodations. So it was no secret that I had autism. I mean, the school system knew about it, and they tried. I think when I look back on it, I realized they did the best they could with what they had to work with. And they allowed me to go to the school, even though I struggled socially. I was still able to do at least decent grade-wise. I'd have, mainly B's and C's and a couple of A's and a here and a couple of D's there. But for the most part, I had pretty average grades in the subjects such as English, math, social studies, and so on and so forth. And so once I realized that I had autism, that was one part of the puzzle. The next part was trying to do something about it. What do I do? How do I correct or overturn a whole lifetime of responses to the world and behaviors that were part and parcel of that? But at the same time, I realized that I didn't want to stay disconnected from everybody for the rest of my life. And so with the help of family and some other people, I really set out to chart a course to navigate my way through the maze of autism. It was largely self-created, because I did create my own shell as a child. And now I was trying to realize that, life in this shell isn't all it's cracked up to be. So now I'm trying to find a metaphorical chisel and chip away at it, but I have to figure out how to do that. And so some of the ways I did that was first by practicing looking at myself in the mirror, making eye contact with my own reflection. And that was really going against the grain, because I didn't like looking at myself. And but I figured that if I started being comfortable doing that, then eventually that would morph into learning to make eye contact with other people on a more consistent level, to where I would fit in much better. I wouldn't be, looking away from them or above them or behind them or anything. I'd be looking directly at them. And of course, that's one way to build social skills, is by looking at people and conveying the message that you're interested in them. So I had to do that. I also later, well into my adulthood, started reading books that were not necessarily about autism per se, but were about some of the things I was struggling with as a result of having autism. Things like assertiveness, things like how to deal with stress and fear and anxiety. So I read a lot of books about assertiveness training. I even took an assertiveness training class when I was, I think, in my early 20s. And started reading these books and started trying to put into practice what they advised. And it was very, it was very upsetting, and it was also very disillusioning to me when things didn't work out as quickly as I hoped. It was one thing to read about how to become a more assertive person, quite another to actually put it into practice and get to the point where you felt comfortable and natural doing it. And so I did those kinds of things. I went to a lot of seminars that were about, related somehow to autism, trying to figure out how I can connect more with the world. Even when I was in high school, when I was a senior, I think in high school, I intentionally took a speech class, knowing that it would force me out of my comfort zone and force me into a very uncomfortable situation of being in front of a class, reading a speech, and having all eyes upon me. Well, I knew that would be hard, and it certainly was. The first speech I gave was sort of like an improv thing where the person before me would say something, and then I would have to get up and continue the train of thought, say so much, and then the next person after me would continue where I left off, and so on. And I was so nervous that I pretended to be sick and went to the nurse's office. But I knew I couldn't keep getting conveniently sick every time it was my turn to give a speech. Eventually, something was going to have to give. So I just sucked it up and just started trying to learn to look at other people in the most uncomfortable of situations. And giving speeches with public speaking is one of the hardest things people do. I mean, they've done studies on this, and they've said that for some people, even the fear of death is less daunting than the fear of getting up and doing public speaking. But I knew that I had to do something that dramatic if I was ever going to become better at learning social skills. And I took another speech class at a junior college that I went to. I attended a place called Los Angeles Valley College. It's in Van Nuys, California. And I was there until 1984 when I moved back to Ohio and finished my studies here. But while I was there, I took another speech class because I wanted to hone my skills that I had developed from the speech class that I took while in high school. So I did all of these kinds of things. I did everything I could think of to really try to catch up and learn the things that I'd missed as a child. And thankfully, I have parents and a sister who were very much my advocates and did everything in their power to try to help me. When we lived in California, my father and mother would stay up sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, trying to go over the same things over and over and over with me about relationships and helping me to try to understand why certain perceptions that I had about relationships were inappropriate, or why, a certain relationship with one person was appropriate, but not the same relationship with another person would not be, and all those kinds of dynamics. And they were hoping that if they said those things and went over that same territory over and over again, eventually it would click. And finally, over time, it did. But again, it was just the way my brain was wired, I guess. It was just something that took a long time to really understand, let alone put into practice. And I compare learning social skills with learning a sport or learning to play a musical instrument. For most of us who want to learn to play the piano, we have to learn the major and minor scales and chord progressions. You have to learn the mechanics of music before you can start playing music. If you want to learn to play basketball, you have to shoot 1,000 shots. You have to go over the same drills and same movements over and over again until you become close at mastering them. You don't just learn to play basketball and then the next thing you know, you're LeBron James. It takes a lot of effort and talent to be able to get to that point. Well, for me, learning social skills really was not a whole lot different from that. It was something I had to keep practicing over and over, a lot of repetition. It took probably 10 or 12 years at least to really get to the point where I was comfortable in most social situations. It was something that just evolved over time, just like, you go from learning to watch the pitch to a lot of stuff has to happen in between learning how to watch the ball that's thrown to you, and you're finding yourself in the major leagues. A lot of stuff that has to happen between those 2 points. Well, that's what it was for me, learning all this social skills stuff. So it really took a long time. But I wanted to also, I don't know how much time I have, but in the remainder of the time, I'd like to sort of go over and summarize some of the unwritten rules. I won't be able to go over all of them in the interest of time, but I'd like to at least sort of scratch the surface about some. And this book that I wrote with Dr. Temple Grandin, I think shines pretty well because even though Temple Grandin and I were both diagnosed with autism, we have very diverse lives. We do not have a whole lot in common. Her priorities are very different from mine. She's a very structured and wired a very different way. And so I think that lends a lot of credence to the book because you get 2 very different perspectives on some of these unwritten rules. And we distilled them down to 10 rules that for most people who are neurotypical are things that they learn very early in life and are based largely in common sense. But when you're dealing with somebody on the spectrum, they can be very difficult not only to understand, but to be able to navigate through and apply to their lives. And there's quite a few of them, but I'll just touch upon a couple of them briefly here. I think one of them, and I think in this day and age, probably one of the most important ones is the idea of being able to differentiate between someone who's friendly to you and someone who's your friend. Many people on the spectrum, including people who have Asperger's syndrome, may have a hard time with that because they want to have friends. They want to have people like them. They want to be able to connect with people, just like all of the rest of us do. And so sometimes their sense of critical judgment isn't always well attuned. And so they can become vulnerable to maybe getting into some difficult or dangerous situations if they can't differentiate between someone who's being friendly and versus someone who's being their friend. Society expects us to be friendly. If you are buying groceries, you're expected to be friendly to the checkout person, and the checkout person's expected to be friendly to the customer. If you're trying to buy a car, obviously the salesman has to be friendly to you if they want to make a sale or want you to buy a car from them. So that's most situations that you're expected to be friendly, but the difference is being a friend is kind of like social skills. It takes time to cultivate. It's not an overnight process. Developing a friendship is a 2-person investment, not a 1-person. Both people have to be invested in the interest of the friendship for it to grow and blossom. And that's something that takes time. And so I think it's so important to teach people who struggle with that, the idea that friendships are great things to have, but they don't necessarily happen overnight. They have to have time. It's just like if you plant a garden, you plant the seeds, cultivate the soil and water it, overnight you don't have 10-foot high trees or 10-foot high plants. It takes time for them to grow to that point, but they start growing because you planted the seed and you've done all the preliminary work. Well, friendships are very much like that. You plant the seeds and hopefully they grow into healthy existences. And so that's kind of an important thing. Another rule that we talk about quite a bit is the difference between being honest with a person versus being diplomatic. Honesty, I always call sort of like the black and white, the bookends of interactions with other people. You want to be honest with them if you've done something that upsets them. You want to take responsibility for it. You want to be honest with them, and apologize if necessary, that sort of thing. But most interactions are more in the nebulous gray areas between the black and white points. And that's where diplomacy comes in. A lot of times I've found that you can be very diplomatic with a person and still get your message across even better sometimes than being brutally honest, because that's one thing Temple Grandin has talked about. So she's talked to and run into people who are very intelligent, who have Asperger's syndrome, but they have a hard time not being brutally honest. If they work like in a high-tech field or at a very strenuous job, they may be very honest with another coworker and think they're helping the coworker when that person interprets them as being unfriendly or too bold. And sometimes they can go to the boss, and the person who is being honest and thinks they're trying to be helpful can get into trouble for it and even lose their job. So sometimes it's just being diplomatic and talking to somebody in that fashion is much better than just trying to be brutally honest or saying something that runs the risk of alienating another person or hurting their feelings. So those are some of the rules. And the last one that I talk about in great length is really one of our ultimate life lessons. We're all responsible for our own happiness, and by extension, our own self-preservation, our own joy that we derive from life. I can't depend on another person to make me happy. The happiness factory has to be operating within my soul, and everybody is responsible for making their own happiness and decisions and charting a course through life that will bring them the most satisfaction. I've really kind of flipped the script in recent years. When I was dealing with autism, I was really self-focused and thinking about what I needed to survive each day. And today, I derive my greatest pleasure out of hearing other people's stories, allowing other people to share themselves with me. Because after all, I know my story. I live with me and I show up everywhere I go. So I pretty much know my story. I get much more satisfaction out of hearing other people and having them open up to me. And I think one of the most valuable gifts you can ever give a person is the art of active listening. There's a difference between just listening and hearing versus active listening. To me, active listening is opening your ears, heart, and mind to that person. It has the built-in value of validating that person's humanity and making them feel that they do matter to you. Even if, I've gotten in the habit now of, you can talk to me about the most boring subject, and I will do my best to listen to you and ask whatever questions I can that will make you feel like continuing and moving on with the conversation. And also the built-in value of active listening is that you learn a lot more than you do from talking, from expounding upon yourself. And I work as a journalist, so I spend a lot of time listening to other people. And sometimes actively listening can change the whole course of how the interaction goes. I sometimes think, well, I'm going to ask this person this question. And if I actively listen to them, they may address what I was going to ask them before I do so. And so it opens up another avenue for me to learn more about them. So active listening to me is something I now sort of pontificate on, because it's such a valuable gift. It's something that I try to use all the time in any type of interaction with people. It doesn't matter what level of friendship I have with them, whether they're a close friend, whether they're family, whether they're an acquaintance on the outer rings of human interaction. And it really has an effect because they feel valued, and they feel that they matter, and they do to me. And I think that gift takes on added urgency as we live through difficult times in which the political discourse is very negative. There's so many people, sadly, who feel like they have license to openly express their hatred, their racism, their sexism, because we live in the political climate where that seems to be not only allowed but embraced. And as long as the good Lord gives me strength in my body and determination in my soul, I'm going to do everything I can to fight against that, because I've been fighting too long to learn this stuff in the first place. And one of my role models in whose life, an example I try to incorporate into my own life while being true to myself, is that of Dr. Martin Luther King. To me, he was, I always get emotional every time I think about it, but he was somebody whose words may have been spoken 60 years ago, but still loudly resound and resonate today. And oftentimes I find myself thinking, what would he do in this situation? And then I'm not trying to be like him. I try to be true to myself, but at the same time incorporate his example into my daily interactions with others. And that's another thing that I did in my efforts to rise above my autism. And I still do it today, is I seek positive role models. Whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's, a person that I interact with at the restaurant I go to, I look at their example. I incorporate some of it into my own repertoire, if you will, of dealing with other people and dealing with this world around me. I try to incorporate the best of them into how I deal with other people while staying true to myself. And I was just a couple of weeks ago, I just got back from my 12th sojourn to the past journey through the Deep South. It's an traveling American history course where we take high school students and teachers through some of the civil rights sites in the Deep South. And this time we started in Birmingham, Alabama, and we ended up 8 days later in Memphis at the Lorraine Motel. And I stood right outside where Martin Luther King stayed and looked out onto the window onto the balcony where he was assassinated. And it gets me very emotional even thinking about it, because I don't know, I just can't help but wonder what our world would be like if he was still with us. I'm sorry, it always happens this way, but I'm determined to do my part to, as he said in his last speech in Memphis in support of the sanitation workers' strike in 1968. I just want to do God's will, and he's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop. And until I get to the mountaintop, that's what I want to do. And each day that we do something kind, something loving, each day that we create a ripple of love, hope, and compassion in someone's life, we're also writing on our own chalkboard a piece of our legacy and how we want to be remembered. And however long I'm allowed to be here, I feel that ultimately all I can do is try to continue writing on the chalkboard of my legacy and thinking about how I want to be remembered. With that, I will be more than happy to entertain any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to share. I've been going on for an hour now,
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
guess, and
Sean,
I'd love to hear from you and
Mhm.
anything that you want to share. Want you to know this is a very safe, non-judgmental environment. So anything that you want to share with me, I hope you'll feel free to do so.
Yeah, Sean, that's so great. We're speaking directly from you. And I can using one of the comments from audience that we are so proud of you because you're really living a way, tell us how you overcome all this way. And I can tell you a little story like in the last 2 days, I attending a global autism conference for the advocacy, for the all different country, even most of them is the developing country. So we get the 33 different country. People come
Wow.
here, tell us how we advocate for autism in each of country. Some of our country I can even cannot spell the name. Even I cannot recognize where it is, but they do all their best, all the parents, all the educated best. And I keep telling people, say, look, in this world, it's so different, so separate. Every people have different political, religion, everything. But I can guarantee you one thing: we can unite people all together, all the world is autism. When we talk about autism, we have one goal. We said how we can understand them, how we can help them, how we can advocate them. You are the living example here. We are so great. You come to us here, show you all this life. You said, okay, you want the living led, Mark, just like a Martin Luther. You already did. One thing is I'm really appreciate is that we also try to promote the in the Chinese community because we don't see much Chinese community self-advocates from autistic population here. It's one reason, of course, Chinese is conservative, a little bit self-container. You don't want the talking, everything personal much there. But another one is we did not do good enough to help them, give them a chance to talking, give them a speak, give them the courage they have. Okay, so we try to do that. Next time, if we have like camp or maybe seminar just for self-care in the Chinese community, we probably will ask you again, come here to talk to them, to help them understand themselves, or maybe help us understand themselves, and give the courage. And because you are a living example, you can tell, hey, look, this is Sean. You do a journalist. You give all the wonderful speak out there. You encourage so many people. Okay, we want to welcome. We not only Chinese community, we also talking about the other immigrant community. We have the community from Ethiopia. We have the community from Vietnam. We come from the Mexican. The immigrant family here with the children on the autistic, they facing much more challenge when everybody else here, right? Because language, culturally there, and we also need the help. We need also the encouragement. So we're talking about how we can help each other, and I give them example. Say, look, Sean Barron said they come here. If he can come to here, you can come. He come to your community. You can talk to your children, right? Because we got to help them. We got to help everybody on the autism spectrum, every family with autism spectrum. This one, So this is, we have many years to read your book. We know your story, but it's here you tell us all about this. So it's different. It's really different, and we appreciate. I think I probably talking too much. Let me see if
No.
anybody asking, what do you think about neurodiversity movement?
I think it seems to, oh, there's an echo. Neurodiversity, I think some people could view it perhaps as sort of a civil rights issue unto itself. Seems to me that anytime anyone's not being treated fairly or equally, anytime that happens and there's a movement, the word movement after it, I'm kind of buoyed and encouraged by it, because it shows that people are not happy with the status quo, whatever that may mean, and they're banding together to get what they feel is fair and just. We're seeing that across other sections of society. Unfortunately, like LGBTQ people are facing a lot of discrimination, even in the halls of government, and certainly the neurodiversity movement. I think is, from what I've seen, it seems like a very powerful movement. It certainly made people, the right people, it's gotten their attention, for one thing, and I think it seems to me that anybody with autism should have the same kinds of services, that should not be deprived of those for any, any type of artificial construct, like where they live, who their family members are, anything, any other factor. They should be able to be given whatever treatment or interventions they may need to help them thrive. So yeah, anything like the neurodiversity movement, I'm certainly in support of. Did anybody else have? I see a couple of questions. I'm not sure how to
Okay, yeah. So let me
answer
see.
those. I hope I can.
I think that's the end of the questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's another one. Oh,
Okay.
You're doing great. How did you get? Hold on. You're doing great. How did you get the motivation to overcome the barriers and force yourself to practice, go to speech class and give a speech?
Well, that's a very insightful question, and I appreciate that. I think as I got older and started to mature more, came of age, it became painfully evident that there was a cataclysmic gulf between where I perceived myself as being socially and where everybody else seemed to be socially. There was a huge chasm existing. I felt like I was sort of in my own world, and everybody was over here enjoying the fruits of their social abilities and their friendships, and now here I was on this side of the shore, and I wanted to somehow, make it from the shore of negativity to the shore of positivity. And I saw and perceived that there was a huge gap where I was socially and everybody else seemed to be. And so that provided a strong incentive for me to want to try to do whatever I could to reach the other side of the shore. And that meant taking the speech class. It meant attending some of these seminars about personal growth and all the other things that I alluded to. I was all of them were driven by a desire to connect with everybody else. I didn't want to grow up and be 50, 60, 70 years old and still not be able to know how to interact with people, still not be able to know how to pick up a phone. Well, nowadays you text and use social media, but be able to reach out to people and say, hey, would you like to get together for a cup of coffee? I didn't want to be able to grow into old age and not be able to do those kinds of things. And we're all social beings. We all need that connectivity with one another. Even and people with autism are no different in that regard than their neurotypical counterparts. And so I was just had these incentives to try to do that.